Hey everybody, it's Mr. Clint here. We're out here at the Veterans Urban Farm, and we've got another farm to school lesson for you. Today we're going to be learning all about the plant life cycle. And so we're going to be out in our field a little bit, taking a look at some plants, and then we have a fun activity at the end that we're going to use to kind of wrap it all up. Working on a farm, I get to see plants growing up all the time. We grow all sorts of stuff, but it never stops amazing me how a seed this tiny can actually grow into a plant as big as this, and even bigger, really. So most of us probably know that plants start as a little seed and then end up as food that we eat. But all that in between time can sometimes be a little bit confusing thinking about how those plants are actually growing. So we've got a couple guiding questions that we're going to ask just to kind of get our brains in the mindset of how plants grow. So one that I want us to think about is, what parts does a plant have? Because before we can start talking about how the plant grows, we should have some words we can use to identify it. So let's take just a minute. You can pause the video, and I want you to think up as many different plant parts as you can. How many plant parts can you think of? We have 6 main plant parts that we can identify when we want to talk about plant life cycles, or how plants grow. So starting from the bottom, those 6 are roots, stems, leaves, flowers, fruits, and seeds. Our next couple questions are going to help us think about the process from starting a plant to the end of that plant's life cycle. What I want you to think about now, and after I ask the question, you can take a moment to pause the video so you have some more time to think, is what is the first plant part that starts to grow when a plant starts to grow? We know when we start a plant, we start with a seed. So we're not going to use that one as the first plant part that grows, but it is the first one that we interact with. The first plant part that grows out of that little tiny seed is actually a little tiny root. It starts out really tiny, but of course, it's going to get a lot bigger as that plant gets older. For our last guiding question, we're going to focus more on the end of the plant life cycle rather than the beginning. What I want you to think about is, what is the last plant part that develops on a plant? So go ahead and take a minute, pause the video while you think about that one, and we'll be right back. If you remember from our last video about pollinators, pollinators like bees and butterflies will actually come visit flowers to drink nectar as their food. And when a flower gets pollinated or fertilized, it actually changes into a different plant part. A flower will actually change into a fruit. And inside of that fruit then develop, of course, the seeds. So the seeds are both the first and the last part of that plant life cycle, which is why we call it a cycle. It kind of just goes around and around and around. We plant the seed, the roots and stems and leaves grow, our plant flowers, gets pollinated and produces fruit, and inside of that fruit are more little seeds that we can use to grow more plants. You might be wondering, what's the use of learning about all these different plant parts, or how plants grow? I think that it's a really important thing to understand because most all of our food comes from plants. Some plants we eat the root of, like a carrot. Some plants we eat the leaf of, like lettuce, or the fruit, like a tomato. So today we have actually an activity. And this is a really simple activity that you can do at school or at home with really simple materials. It is a microgreen growing activity. So we're going to be growing microgreens, which you can see as an example right here. They're really just baby seedlings that we can eat. And so when we eat these, we're going to be eating the stem and leaf. Now the materials that you're going to need for this activity are a pie tin. This is just a disposable aluminum one, but you can use a standard metal pie tin or a glass pie tin that you have at home. Or if you don't have a pie tin, you could even use something like an egg carton or a Tupperware dish. Really just anything kind of shallow that you have lying around that you can fill with potting soil, which would be another important material for this activity. You just want enough potting soil to reach the top of whatever container you're using. You're also going to need some seeds. Now I know not everyone probably has a giant 1-pound bag of radish seed lying around, but you don't have to use radish seeds, and you don't need this many of them. You can use any vegetable that you would normally eat, you can eat a microgreen of. Just a packet of seeds will do fine. And you can find packets of seeds at most hardware stores and some grocery stores too. The last thing you're going to need is some way to water it. I like using a spray bottle, but if you're very careful, you can also use a watering can, or if you have a spray nozzle on your sink, that would work too. Once you have filled your container with soil, we are going to add our seeds. So since I've got this big bag, I'm just going to grab a small handful and kind of sprinkle them evenly over the top. Whoop. And sometimes you might actually drop a few too many in one spot, but that's okay because we can kind of just spread those out. And then you're going to want to pat it down. We don't want to push it down. We just want to do a nice, gentle pat. What that is going to do is help our seeds have more contact with the soil. It means they're going to absorb more water. They're going to grow faster, just like that. And once you have your seeds on there, get your spray bottle, and we're just going to give it a little bit of a spray. We don't want it to get super soaking wet, so it's really heavy and muddy. But for the very first water, we do want to be thorough. We want to make sure that they get a nice, good drink. And for future waterings, which you would want to water these about once a day, just a nice light spritz to keep them moistened will be plenty. And there you have it, a microgreen grow kit. Now you'll just want to set these in a sunny window or next to somewhere where they're going to get some light. They don't need a ton of light, just a little bit each day. And then after just a couple days, you're going to start seeing little tiny sprouts. And eventually they're going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And they're going to look like this. But it's going to take a little bit, so we've got to have a little bit of patience. But we don't just want to plant them and forget about them, right? We want to keep our eye on them. We want to make sure that they are doing all right. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to make some observations in your science notebook. I'd like you to make an entry in your science notebook, and we are going to take a daily observation for these microgreens. So I'm going to go ahead and start a new entry in my science notebook here. So today, we'll put today's date, and I'm going to put microgreen observation log. And I want to measure it. I want to see how tall they are. And you can even measure it at a couple different spots in the dish if you want. And let's see, how tall are our microgreens? We are sitting at about 3.5 centimeters for this tall one right in the middle. Let's check over here on these. We got some over here that are almost 4 centimeters tall. And remember, we do want to use centimeters anytime that we are measuring scientifically. So we're going to put 3.5 on the middle and 4 along the edge. And if you really want, you can even draw a little rendition of your microgreens So I'm gonna get a couple colors out here, a pencil, and I'm just gonna do a quick sketch of how this looks. And it's okay if you're not a fantastic artist, because I promise you, neither am I. We just wanna get a nice little, just a rough sketch of how these are looking. And there we have it, a very rough sketch of our microgreens. So we're going to also make some observations just on one single microgreen in here. So I'm just gonna pick one out very gently. Here is our beet microgreen. Nice and red, very lovely. So we can even identify some of the plant parts on here. So on this microgreen, we can identify the root down here. You can see it's a little bit paler in color than the stem because it doesn't get any sunlight. But then we also have the stem, a couple of leaves, and the last little bit of the seed that this grew from stuck on the end of the leaf there. So we are gonna make a quick drawing of our microgreen, and then we're gonna label those plant parts to help us kind of review those a little bit. And there we have a nice little drawing of one of our microgreens. Let's go ahead and label these plant parts just as a little bit of review. We don't have all the plant parts on this example, but we can do a couple. Down here we have the root. And of course we've got the stem. And up here the leaf. And that little tiny part right up on top, that is the old remnants of our seed. So even when a plant is this young, just a couple weeks old, we still have 4 identifiable plant parts that we can see. We just wanted to say thanks for joining us today, and we will see you all next time.